Welcome to North Carolina's World Language High Five for 2020-2021. This is a broadcast about the reentry resources using the TEL project, or Teacher Effectiveness for Language work, that are aligned to the North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, our state standards. If you can hear me broadcasting, please go ahead and indicate in our Q&A box that you can hear things loud and clear so that we can verify that as we get going. Excellent, thank you. We are recording today, and so that means everyone is on mute to facilitate that, but we can always connect through our polling questions and through the Q&A box. Today, as I said, we're going to talk about our High Five, that's the name we've given it, and our reentry resources for this school year. There are several purposes for that. The first is to help all teachers and administrators as we start this new school year under very different circumstances than we usually do. Specifically, we're going to talk about bridging any potential gaps that we may have with students, especially since the spring semester from 2020 ended in such an interesting way for all of us, as well as for our students. We're also going to talk about scaffolding content so that students can continue to build their proficiency in the language they're learning without having to go back and repeat or redo learning that might have been lost in the spring. We want to make sure students are always moving forward and working on the proficiency they need for the courses that they're currently in. So we're going to talk about sort of condensing that, making it more concise, and being able to deliver it in a way that works for teachers and for students. We also want to share some best practices in implementing our standards-based curriculum. One of the things that we've all been thinking about is, how do we implement our state standards effectively in a very different learning environment? And the good news is that we are always going to be focused on our state standards and our 4 standards, as we'll talk about here from our World Language Essential Standards. And we're also going to discuss some strategies and performance tasks that you can take right into your classroom, whether your classroom is online, face-to-face, or in some kind of hybrid or blended format this school year. In addition, we're going to talk about how you can use these resources locally in those different types of classrooms and get you started thinking about how that will work best for you. And finally, we have some handouts for you today that will hopefully help guide this. These are what we call the bridging documents because they bridge us from last year's work into this new school year. They're set up for all of our K-12 world language programs, and we're going to be talking about them throughout the broadcast. I hope you've already gotten them as handouts in an email that was sent right before we started this broadcast today. If not, they'll also be posted on the World Languages website so you can get them there. So let's talk about our standards for the moment. I know that you're all thinking about building your curriculum and revising that you have to do for this coming school year. And so I want to assure you again that our High Five that we're sharing with you today, which is 5 things to remember about our state standards, encompasses all of our proficiency-based state standards for world languages. Specifically, we're going to talk about language performance and proficiency in the classroom, how you can get students to process language in the interpretive mode. Remember, interpretive is reading, listening, and viewing. How you can get students to produce language in the interpersonal and presentational modes of communication. How you can get students to use language, the language they're learning, to investigate culture and interact appropriately in a culturally competent manner. And finally, we're going to talk about measuring student language growth through performance assessments. So you can see another reason for a High Five is that these are the 5 things that you can keep in mind as you start to work towards planning and setting up your classroom and learning environment for your students this year. I do want to give credit where credit's due. The High Five creators, compilers, and presenters are pictured here on the screen with their Bitmojis. You've been hearing me. I am Anne-Marie Gunter, your K-12 World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I'll go ahead and let my colleagues introduce themselves for today.
Hi, I'm Leslie Baldwin. I'm the World Languages Director in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County.
Hi, I'm Mara Kobe, and I'm the K-12 World Languages Curriculum Specialist for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools.
And I'll go ahead and introduce one person who's getting through some tech difficulties. Melissa Perez is joining us from Durham Public Schools.
And I'm Delynda Ramirez-Carter from Wake County Public Schools.
All right, so we've been working across the summer to put these materials together for you and to share them for the first time here. We also will be digging deeper into these kinds of materials throughout the school year, so stay tuned for that. As we get started here, I want to make sure everyone knows what's on their WebEx event control panel. You see a screenshot of what you should have probably on the right-hand side, although it does vary a little bit depending on what device or browser you're using. But WebEx is accessible online and via the app, so you might have used the app as well. As I said before, all participants are on mute for recording purposes. Your control panel on the side displays things like the host or speaker information, so you can see the names of who's presenting today. Periodically, we'll do polling questions, and they'll be in the right-hand side there on your control panel. And then, of course, the Q&A is always available on your control panel. And I see most of you have found that. And finally, the buttons on the bottom of your screen should give you access to different things. Here's sort of a large version of the buttons, as you see. Keep in mind that the question mark one, of course, goes to the Q&A panel. And you can see participants if you hit the one that looks like a little person icon. And finally, when we're done today, you'll hit the X button that's in red to go ahead and leave the webinar. We do ask that you be patient with us. WebEx events, which is what we're using, replaced GoToWebinar, which is what we used to use for the World Language Webinar series, and that happened at the beginning of this month. So a lot of these things are brand new to us, and we're becoming familiar with how this platform works and how best to interact with you throughout. All right, well, let's start with a polling question and find out why you're here today. So why did you join the broadcast today? Was it because you want to access professional development made for world languages? Was it because you want to earn 1.5 contact hours for an hour-and-a-half long broadcast for license renewal? Did you want to gather information for your department, your team, your school, or district? Do you want to learn about resources that are available for this coming school year? Or did you need to ask a question? I'll go ahead and open that, and you can see you can just click onto any answer you want, and you can check all that apply on this. We only have about a minute, but we're usually pretty fast at these polls. All right, let's go ahead and finish up with the polling and see where we are. All right. If you look, I have shared the results with you in your control panel so you can see what's happening there. It looks like a number of you are here simply to learn about resources for the coming school year. That's always a good idea to jump in and do that. Do keep in mind that we will post everything from this broadcast so you have access to it afterwards in case you want to go back and get some additional information or find out more. We also have a fairly large number of you who are here gathering information to share with someone else that you teach with or work with. And that's always a good thing too. We want to make sure that we spread information around and work with each other. A number of you wanted to access professional development made for world languages. That's always encouraging. And keep in mind, we will still have a world language webinar series throughout this coming school year that you can attend other professional development made for world language educators. We've also got several of you here who want to earn contact hours for license renewal. That's a great reason to join us. You do need to actively participate in the live broadcast to do that. One thing I can tell you is that our process has changed for that. So this year, once we close out our webinar and verify attendance and everything, you will receive an email with an attached certificate for your participation today in the webinar. That email usually goes out a week or so following the live broadcast. So expect it then. And there are also a few of you who have some questions to ask and things, so that's great. Thank you so much for sharing why you're here today. We're happy you're with us, and we're eager to share some of these resources that you want to learn more about. I do always check the Q&A box during polling questions, and I see that we have one person who said, why can't I see the participants in this? Well, we didn't actually activate that feature today because we thought we might have a lot of folks online, and we do. We have over 100 people online, and so seeing the participant box is hard for everyone. So that's just not something you can access today, but I assure you, you're here with a lot of colleagues, over 100. All right. Today, as we go through the broadcast, one way we have tried to make visible to you who's talking is to use our high five Bitmojis to remind you that we're looking at 5 different things today that have to do with our implementing our standards efficiently and effectively in the classroom. And each of our speakers has their own high five Bitmoji that you'll see displayed on the slides that they're going to be talking to you about. This is a good way to keep track of who's talking, but also for us as we co-present together. All right, well, I'll start out. I wanted to share with you the overview of our High Five TEL project goals for reentry. When we talked about what would be most important for teachers to keep in mind as we started this new school year under very different circumstances than most school years, we decided we wanted a way for people to quickly focus on our state standards, implementing those in their classrooms, and not forgetting anything that might be important in that implementation process. So we went to the TEL project, the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning project. That's a national project. And we picked out goals that would help us all focus on those things. We picked 5, and here they are. The first one in red, EN4, is about the teacher creating an environment focused on language performance and proficiency. And that's important because we have proficiency-based standards in North Carolina. The next 3 are from the Learning Experience Learning Tools, or LE section of the TEL project. These are important because they cluster together and they make sure that we address all 4 of our state standards. LE3 looks at teachers providing opportunities for students to process language in the interpretive mode of communication. LE4 looks at teachers providing opportunities for students to produce language in the interpersonal and presentational modes. And LE5 looks at teachers providing opportunities for students to investigate cultural products, practices, and perspectives in order to interact appropriately with others, and when we look at that cultural component. And finally, PF1 looks at performance, and we want to make sure we're always focused on teachers measuring student language growth through performance assessments, so students showing us what they know and can do with the language that they're learning. This is tied directly to our standards, and we wanted to share with you how that works in case you need to share that with someone else, like an administrator, or you just want to explore more about how our standards are structured. Here you see a screenshot from our administrator guides for world languages. There are 3 of them, one for each of our K-12 language programs. But they all have this component here that shows how our 4 standards are woven together with our 3 strands and how that works so that we're aligned to the national standards from ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And we're going to show you today then how this structure is also aligned to our High Five and the 5 things that we're focusing on for this school year. So that first one we talked about, EN4, about creating an environment focused on language performance and proficiency, is covered in our administrator guides with a little discussion about the ACTFL proficiency guidelines and how each proficiency level has its own description of what students can do with language at each level and with each type of communication that they're working on. LE3 is the one that speaks to the interpretive mode of communication, which is our second standard in the North Carolina Essential Standards. And you see here where it's listed, but also how it links in. In the handouts we have for you, the bridging documents that we're going to be using throughout the year, that, by the way, is recognized with the interpretive symbol from the successful, actual, can-do statements. And so you see that little icon coming up on the right-hand side. And remember, interpretive communication is all about understanding, interpreting, or analyzing authentic text through listening, reading, or viewing. It's important to keep that in mind because you'll see that icon again, and it's a good reminder of what that skill involves. By the way, for those of you sharing these slides, that icon is also visible on the slides that cover interpretive communication so that you can keep them separate and sort them in whatever way you need to. Next up is our combined one for LE4 that looks at both interpersonal communication, which is our first essential standard, and also presentational communication, which is our third essential standard. So you see where that's at in our standards. But also know, again, interpersonal has its own icon because interpersonal talks about exchanging information and ideas, meeting needs and addressing situations, and expressing, reacting to, and supporting preferences and opinions in conversations. Presentational communication, our third essential standard, looks at when students present information about their lives, their experiences, and other things happening around them, or explain their preferences or opinions on things. The difference between these two, of course, is that interpersonal is more informal because it's spontaneous, and presentational is when you've rehearsed something, like if you're going to speak, or you've drafted and revised something, for example, in presentational writing. Finally, for our standards, we have LE5, of course, which looks at culture and our practices, products, and perspectives focused on that. That is our fourth essential standard, and so you see that here. And culture actually has two different icons in the successful, actual, can-do statements. It has investigate, where students are really investigating or researching products and practices to understand those cultural perspectives and what those tell them about the culture they're learning about, and also how they compare to their own culture. There's also interact, because students need to interact with others in and from that culture that they're learning about so that they become culturally competent. And finally, the PF1, where teachers measure student language growth through performance assessment, is also covered in our administrator guides because we look at how skills progress at different levels and we think about all the factors that impact that, like student motivation, continuity and quality of instruction, informal exposure to the language through travel or study abroad or working online or doing international exchanges and projects, or even accessing online resources for individual practice. All right, so that was quite a bit in a very short period of time. What was new to you about the North Carolina High Five we're going to talk about? Was it those administrator guides in general? Was it the graphics showing how our standards and strands weave together? Was it the TEL project overall and its updated goals and sub-criteria? Because the TEL project has been around for a while, but it was recently updated in 2019. Or would you say most or all of these were familiar to you? Go ahead and put your answer on the control panel, and we will do a double check on the Q&A and make sure we've answered all the questions. All right, we're counting down. We're going to close out this poll soon and find out what was new to you about our NC High Five overall. All right, take a look. You should be able to see the results for everyone in the control panel where your poll questions were. And it looks like the thing that was most new, about 60 of you said, was the TEL project in general, and its stated goals and sub-criteria. And that's good to know, because as we're thinking about how to share information about the TEL project and how it supports our standards, as well as maybe how to incorporate that more as when we next revise our world language standards, it's good to know that some of you are not yet familiar with this, or that it's new to you and might be something very helpful to all of us. Also, we had a little over 30 people saying that the graphic showing how our 4 standards and our 3 strands weave together was good. And keep in mind, our 3 strands always weave through those standards. So that's connections to language and literacy, communities, and connections to other disciplines. Always go through all of our 4 standards. So that's something we can use to draw on when we think about what we bring into the classroom with content and language. We also had a little over 30 people who said they were really kind of familiar with all of those, so that was good. We had a few people who said the administrator guides for world languages were relatively new, so keep an eye out for those. They have been available since about 2014, but we've been sharing them in different ways, so you might not have seen them until now. They contain a lot of information that could be helpful, especially if you're an administrator or want to mentor, let's say, a newer teacher to North Carolina. Our administrator guides have also served for models for other content areas. So you might see a version of administrator guides for things like school counseling, arts education, or other subject areas. And finally, we have no questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move us forward.
All right, and so it's my turn. This is Leslie Baldwin in Winston-Salem again. We're going to talk a little bit today about the environment domain from the TEL framework, and that is the piece of the environment about the teacher creating an environment focused on language performance and proficiency. And of course, we know that performance is what goes on in the classroom with teacher support and scaffolding and all the help that you provide for students to be able to perform in the language and do what they do in your classrooms. And then proficiency is what they can do on their own in a target language community without the help of that classroom, but that's what we are pushing them towards. And so specifically, we are going to talk about the teacher creating an environment that supports students' use of the target language within that environment focused on performance and proficiency. As Anne-Marie mentioned, the administrator guides are a great resource to help explain how our standards weave together, how they are based on the national standards, and what we should expect to see in the classroom and what that classroom looks like when it is based on performance and proficiency. We know that we will see evidence of the goals that are working towards the proficiency scale and the proficiency levels in the classroom and in the planning. And those levels, the main levels are novice, intermediate, and advanced, as you see at the bottom of the slide there. With the novice level being represented by the parrot, the intermediate is a survivor who can get along, and the advanced is more of a storyteller. And then we also have this little graphic that is the parakeet or the parrot coming out of the egg, kind of representing that almost pre-novice who's really just getting started, the learner who's just getting started with language and is just starting to play around a little bit and learn. And so to expand on those proficiency levels, we know that they are defined by tasks and by text type and the kind of things that students can do in the language. And so at the novice level, the parrot, we know that learners repeat a lot of memorized language. That's why they're a parrot. They do lots of repeating. They memorize chunks and they they give those back to us. At the intermediate level, or the survivor, that's the learner who can get along okay in the language, but they're not super comfortable in a lot of ways either. So they get along in some various situations, but they also have definite ceilings or limits to their language and to what they can do. The parrot, or the novice, is working towards the sentence level, text type and speech, while the intermediate, or the survivor, is working towards that paragraph level. And then at the advanced level, we have the storyteller, and that's the person who is very fluid in the language. They're comfortable in multiple time frames. They're comfortable with a wide variety of topics, and can handle new topics with ease and without getting rattled. And so in our K-12 programs, we really don't go beyond that advanced level. And most of our learners would be at the novice or intermediate level, depending upon your program and the student's experience. And then, of course, we have our little pre-novice learner there in the egg, who is just getting ready to move into that novice level and start producing some speech. And Maria, I think that's you.
Yes. So now that you've heard a little bit more about that, we wanted to share with you these bridging documents we put together because they show how each K-12 program moves from the very beginnings of proficiency to the upper levels where we expect students to be at the end of their K-12 experience. So we're going to talk about moving students across the bridge from where they currently are with their target language proficiency, and again, where they were when you finished your classes with them at the end of the spring semester, or in May or June, whenever that was, or even where they were if you haven't been able to connect with them since then, since we did remote learning, so that they could continue to move on and move forward, because we want them to move to where they need to be by the end of the grade level or course in this coming school year. We want them to stay on track with building their proficiency in the language so that they can then progress and move forward even beyond this school year to that next level of course that they're ready for. So we have these documents for K-12 classical languages, that's like Latin and ancient Greek. We have them for K-12 DLI programs where students are learning language through content. And we have them for K-12 modern languages where students are learning language when it's taught as a separate subject. So I'm going to give you a moment. You should have received an email with those handouts earlier today, probably right before our broadcast began. And they're also available on our website where this webinar information will be. So go ahead and pull those up if you have them. And I'm also going to take a quick look and see where they might be, if they're located someplace else. Give me just one moment, and I'll go ahead and pull up where those are. I'm seeing notes in the chat box that you did not receive those. So we'll make sure we just pull them up so that you can get to them. The good news is all of these handouts are actually on our World Language Webinar Series page. And some of you are saying you found them online. If you look in the Q&A box, you'll see that I've sent the link to the page where they're posted. And someone had also asked, by the way, will these slides and things be available after the presentation? The answer is yes, and they'll be on that same page I just sent you. So if you go there, you will find actually some archives from our last broadcast, but you will find these 3 documents. The important thing to note here is that when you use these documents, as I said, they're going to have links to our different communication modes and pieces of this presentation to give you ideas and resources of where you can go for things you can use in your classroom with your students, either as online tools that you can access or ideas to get started in your classroom, even if they might just be reminders of good things to do in your classroom. So let's move on, and I'll let Leslie take over again and talk to you a little bit about a few other things to keep in mind with proficiency.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. So we talked just a second ago about that difference between performance and proficiency. And what we see in the classroom is their language performance while we are working towards a proficiency level. But we have to practice being that proficiency level before we can actually become that proficiency level. So we have to do things that look like that proficiency level in the classroom with all that support before we can do it by ourselves and on our own as learners. And so that's what this slide is representing, that there are things that as language learners, we or our students can do. We're very comfortable with those things. We're comfortable in a target language community with those skills. But then there are some things that we can do, but we really need some help. And that's where the scaffolding of the classroom comes into play. That's where you as the teacher come into play in facilitating that learning. And helping students move from what they can do to add on some more language skills. And so they can do it with help. And that's what's in their zone of proximal development. That's that I+1 that we know about with language acquisition. This is where students are really working and gaining language skills. And then there are these things out here that they still can't do that are just beyond the learner's reach. And that's okay, because what's going to happen is as they do more of these things in the middle with the scaffolding and they practice and they practice and they do those with help, eventually those things move into the can-do circle, and then some things from the outside in the blue move into the can-do with help. And so we continue to increase those skills. And that's how we move from the complete unknown to what becomes known and we can do with those scaffolding pieces in the classroom. That's the performance. And then move it into the known. We can do this anytime, anywhere. And that's what our proficiency level is. And so we're going to talk today about some of those scaffolding pieces to help students move from the can-do to the can-do with help, and then move those can-do with help things into their can-do. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. And so some of those things might be anchor charts. They might be, which would be supports in the classroom or online that you could provide. Oh, I didn't mean to move that fast. Sorry about that. It might be that you have students answer the 5 W's and the H question, answering the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so it's very easy for students at the novice level to say sort of a memorized chunk, such as, I like to swim. They can say that. They've memorized how to say I like, and they've memorized some things that can go in that blank. And so at the novice level, they can say that. But to help push them to the intermediate level and to help scaffold those skills for them, they can start to answer some of those questions in order to provide more detail in their sentence. And so if they say, I like to swim with my friends at the pool, those are things that novice learners can string together. Those are all memorized pieces of language that they can start to put together, but having them answer those multiple questions helps them provide more detail and pushes them further into that intermediate level. It might be that there are posters and other visual supports, whether those are in a physical classroom or available in a virtual classroom. As a resource for students. It could be graphic organizers that you provide that help students fill in language in the various boxes that they can then take and use to form sentences or to form paragraphs. We can help them recombine sentences. That's another thing that helps push students from the novice to the intermediate level, so that instead of saying, I like to swim, I like to read, I like to run, and in those 3 choppy sentences, we help them to put that language together with connecting words like and but. Giving them sentence starters, question starters, that really helps, especially the novice learner with their language. We give them that sentence stem and then they can put something in the blank behind it. At the intermediate level, helping students move from one sublevel to another is including transition words, using sequencing words like first, second, finally, last, or words such as however. Those connecting words, those transition words are part of the intermediate level. And so we can provide those as a support and a scaffold until they become more automatic for students. And then things that you do all the time, such as word banks and word walls and the visual cues, those are all scaffolding supports that help students in that area of the I can do this with help. Those are the kinds of things that provide those supports. And then, of course, regardless of the online or a brick and mortar face-to-face environment, we have to remember that comprehensible input and staying in the language, in the target language, is part of our best practice and part of the ACTFL 6 core practices. And so we have to provide models and examples. We have to have those things at the ready so that we can stay in the language and have examples and models to show. We provide options such as either or yes, no kinds of pieces. If they don't understand the question we've asked, then we give an either or option as potential answers to help them start to understand that question without translating in English. We use cognates often if we can. We use gestures. Sometimes we slow down our rate of speech, and we use lots of visuals to help make that language comprehensible. And so that's going to continue to be true in the online environment if that's how your district is starting the year, as well as in face-to-face.
All right. Well, thank you, Leslie, for sharing that with us. Now we're going to think about what you've just heard and decide what is most important for you for the Language Performance and Proficiency High Five. And once again, this is a check all that apply. So it might be the actual proficiency levels, descriptors, and icons. Might be those bridging handouts. Could be the strategies to support proficiency in the classroom, or the strategies for comprehensible input that Leslie shared. I'll go ahead and launch the question. And you can respond then in your control panels, just like always. All right, we're almost done with this question. Be sure and get your answers in so that we can share the responses from everyone. All right. Please take a look. You should see the responses coming up in your control panel. You can see what everybody answered. Most people said they found the thing that's most important for them are those strategies we shared. So strategies to support proficiency in the classroom and strategies for comprehensible input. Even if you're familiar with those strategies, it's always good to have some reminders or possibly some new ideas about what you could use in your classroom to support proficiency. Several of you also said the most important thing will be those bridging handouts you've got to think about how your world language program goes from K-12 up to grade 12. regardless of when your students enter, how proficiency works across that K-12 spectrum. A few of you also said that knowing more about the actual proficiency levels or descriptors and other icons is helpful. And keep in mind that there's a lot of information available about that, those proficiency levels and descriptors, and it's even available from ACTFL in 13 different languages. And so that's also part of what's on the World Languages website. If you wanted to read it in a language other than English, you could get that information. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to go ahead now and move on to the next part of our presentation. And Delynda is going to take over and share with you.
Hello again, this is Delynda from Wake County Schools, and I'm going to be talking about the interpretive mode. So located in the section of advancing student learning of the TEL framework is the learning expectations domain. The screen just went blank.
My apologies, we have some technology issues behind the scene. We are switching back over. There we go.
Okay, so we're going to focus on the where was I? The learning experience domain LE3, where the teacher provides opportunities for students to process language in the interpretive mode. And I can't advance the slide. Okay, there it is. All right. Okay, looking closely at LE3, we're going to focus on the domains C and E. The teacher uses a variety of verbal and nonverbal strategies to make language comprehensible, and the teacher facilitates activities that allow students to interpret, analyze, and interact with authentic materials. So the skills in the interpretive mode are represented by listening, reading, and viewing. And in the interpretive mode, we understand that that requires you to check that your students are understanding the input that they are receiving. Otherwise, you will not know what they understand or what they have learned. And as you are checking for understanding, you're conducting a formative assessment that can be used as a performance assessment. Either way, both can be used to inform future lessons and what other content might need extra attention. Here are some samples of nonverbal and verbal strategies for checking for understanding. So some nonverbal strategies are acting out a gesture, drawing or writing, finger holdups, or sequencing pictures. And some verbal strategies are lineups, exit or entrance slips, summarizing, or questioning. Some of the ideas on the previous slide are more appropriate for a face-to-face setting. So this slide gives you some more ideas how you can shift from a face-to-face setting to the online versions. Some online examples include electronic polls, shareable documents, and discussion forum posts. Some tools that you can use include Pear Deck, Mentimeter, Poll Everywhere, Kahoot, and so on. So depending on whether you are checking for understanding or assigning individual or group work will determine which tool you use. So when you are accessing a text, you want to consider how you will approach it. Keep in mind that a text can be a printed story, a video, a song, a poem, and an infographic. And you will always want to make sure that you give your students several opportunities to interact with the text. The text can be interacted with through multiple times with a different purpose each time. Or if you're watching a video, you can watch it without sound and make observations. And you can identify various components by circling, highlighting, or underlining. This slide includes a plan for accessing a printed text. You can see for the example that you're going to have several different versions of the readings. So in the first read, students may underline the known language. In the second read, they may circle the things that they don't know. And in the third read, they will mark through any language that they don't know. Sorry, they circle the things that they know, mark through the things they don't know, and then read what remains visible in the fourth read. From then, you might continue to some comprehension-based activities. So here's a set of digital tools that can help you to create interpretive opportunities. So you can click on any of the links to start exploring these tools. And these sites offer interpretive activities as well. Some of them offer them in multiple languages. Also, be sure to visit the NCDPI language-specific resources page to access even more interpretive resources.
Here is the language-specific resource page that we were just talking about. Notice that there are a number of resources here for different languages that we teach in North Carolina. And so you can scroll down through here. Additions and updates are made on a regular basis, and hopefully find something that you can use in your classrooms with your students, whether you're online or face-to-face or somewhere in between. All right, that brings us to the interpretive mode high five. And again, we ask you what's most useful for you from this section based on what you saw. Is it the checking for understanding the target language, the go-to ideas, the reading, listening, and viewing strategies, or the digital tools and resources that you saw? Give me just a moment to set up our poll, and we'll be good to go. All right, we're almost done with the poll. Be sure to get your responses in so we know what you're thinking would be the most useful from the interpretive mode section. Let's take a look. In your control panel, you should see the results coming up. It looks like almost all of you, over 90 of you who are on the line today with us, and then we have over 130 total, said that the digital tools and resources we shared would be something that you would want to take a closer look at because they could be very useful to you. And we hope you'll take a look at those and continue to share suggestions with us of other tools you find that would be good. A number of you also said that the reading, listening, and viewing strategies would be helpful, you thought, in your classrooms. And about an equal number of people also thought the go-to ideas that were shared and the checking for understanding the target language would be good. All right, thank you so much. We're going to move forward on to Melissa, who I get to forward the slides for. Melissa, take it away.
Marie. So this afternoon, I will be speaking to you around the presentational mode of communication with LE4 and the teacher providing opportunities for students to produce language in the interpersonal and presentational modes. Specifically on the presentational mode, the teacher facilitates activities for students to interact with others and negotiate meaning. Activities so for language production in their range of performance, and providing students with strategies and supports to enable them to be able to stay in the target language no matter where they lie on the scale of proficiency. Some things to consider: rehearsed speaking and writing in revised writing. So in creating things, opportunities for them to have conversations that they've written and rehearsed. Also, opportunities where they've written something and you've gone back over it and given them several chances to revise their writing and improve it with things that they have already learned. Memorized phrases, memorized vocabulary and sentences, and being able to put those together. These are both good ways to facilitate the presentational mode, providing the scaffolds and support that they need to keep them in the target language along the way. When we're talking about presentational mode and we take a look at the target language output on behalf of the student, we have to make sure that those supports are in place. And this is necessary and critical because otherwise they're not going to be able to stay in the target language. And applying the language learning is just as critical as the input that you provide as the teacher. So these are some things, strategies that you may employ for a growth mindset for learning, things like language ladders, which are the questions of language that can be grouped together. Using sentence frames or sentence starters, some people call them, to sort of, sometimes when students say they have to, write sentences, they can't quite get started, or if you can just fill in a few words for them to give them somewhere to get started, that makes them feel more comfortable and at ease and be able to go into the target language. Using chunking, like memorized chunks of material, and also making the information in digestible chunks so that it's not too much for them at once. And then using things like word walls, posted in with a picture and then the word and the target language, and also using something just as simple as transition words. They can take these chunks of memorized material that they already have and use transitions to kind of put those together to be able to extend their speech and be able to talk more or write more. And looking at things like grammar supports, we have our anchor charts that we can keep posted on our walls as well and add to. And you can do things, of course, to make these digital as well. In looking at how you post them in whatever online platform you're doing, or even when you're doing synchronous learning through a video, like whether you use Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever your particular district uses. Another support with the transition words, these are examples, one in French and one in Spanish that we have here, where just using these small transitions, it gives them a variety, as well as being able to chunk small bits of information that they know, that they've memorized, and be able to put it together to kind of grow the amount they're able to either write or speak whenever they're presenting. When we take this and look at the particular digital aspect of it, for digital online learning, you can make pictures and infographics to help support the presentational communication. You can also create grammar support, sentence frame, word walls, all those kinds of things digitally. And here are some digital tools that we have looked at that are helpful for the presentational mode of communication. In Canva, these are all free, of course. If you have a G Suite, Google Slides, the Google Drive, on MindMeister, PictoChart, and of course PowerPoint if you have a Microsoft account. Particularly Canva, you can do all kinds of things in terms of posters, just like sky's the limit. You can even create your own memes for your classroom, and students can use it for projects for memes and things like that. So these are some really cool supports that you can use to use online for presentational. And then extending that list just a little bit to some additional tools and creating video presentations for sharing in the classroom, whether it's you as a part of your lesson or sharing with your class, or you create a project or an activity that a student would need to create a presentation. These are also some helpful tools. Flipgrid, GoAnimate, Google Voice, Screencastify, Vocaroo, Voki, and WeVideo. They all are a lot of fun and are useful in different ways. Students, when they're working with things, I know they particularly enjoy things like GoAnimate and Voki and Vocaroo, where they have like avatars that they get to create and speak and do things like that. As a teacher, I've found Flipgrid pretty useful because you can create all kinds of prompts and then they can create a short video response. And you can put all kinds of stipulations and rules about how you want it to look and how long it can be and all kinds of things like that. So those are particularly useful in the digital platform. If we want to take a look at presentational writing, there are some tools that are really great for that as well. And these can be for presentations of various lengths, various proficiency levels, depending on where they are. A book creator, a fake book where you create sort of a fake Facebook page or you know, Storybird for Story Jumper, and creating trading card creator from Rewrite Fake. And they always enjoy the social media, you know, the fake social media pages, to be able to create that with target language. It's always a lot of fun. So now I am going to turn it over to Leslie again to talk about specifically interpersonal.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'm going to talk about the interpersonal mode. And of course, we know that is different from presentational in that the interpersonal mode involves negotiation of meaning and interaction. And so normally that means a conversation, whether it be on the phone or face-to-face or through, you know, Skype or Snapchat or you know, any digital tool, but also it could potentially mean some written interpersonal with things like texting or a chat box or things like that. And so with the interpersonal mode, we're really talking about that interaction and using language to exchange information for multiple purposes. As I said, this could be speaking, it could be writing. We usually think about it as speaking. And of course, with American Sign Language, it would also be signing and having a conversation in that way. There are many ways that students can use the interpersonal mode and that we can provide the supports they need so that they can do this. And it's some of the same things that we talked about before with those scaffolding strategies. It might be the word walls. It might be the transition words they need. It could be sentence frames, sentence starters, question starters, those sorts of pieces that can help them with the language supports to help them keep a conversation going or to help them start a conversation, that kind of thing. This is, oops, sorry, went too many, I clicked too many times. This is an example of a word wall in a teacher's classroom where there are different categories of reactions that students could have if they're in a conversation, because that's one of the things that's a normal part of conversation, but our novice and our intermediate learners really need help with how do they do that? How do they say things like, oh, wow, that's interesting, or I agree, or I disagree. Or just, you know, be able to comment on what the other person said. And these kinds of things can be those supports for something like that. Additionally, you might have what we often call passwords in the classroom. And those are the things that are the common questions, the common things students need to be able to say. And they don't need to understand everything about how that question is constructed or the verb conjugation that's involved and all those sorts of things. But it's a language chunk that they can learn and they can memorize, such as, I need help, I don't understand, can I go to the restroom? I need pencil or paper. I don't like something. Just the kind of those common phrases, those common questions, responses that they need in the classroom in order to stay in the target language as much as possible and have their needs met. And so you might have these on the walls in a face-to-face classroom, and in a virtual classroom, again, you might have them as a resource on a particular page in your Canvas course or Google Classroom, something the students have at the ready that they can use when they need to. Of course, information gap activities are helpful in the interpersonal mode, especially at the novice level, because while the true definition of interpersonal is that it's spontaneous interaction and exchange in the language, at the novice level, it's hard to be completely spontaneous, because remember, they're parrots and all they really have are those memorized chunks and pieces. So they really do need some scaffolds and some help to work in the interpersonal mode. And an information gap activity can help with that. Because it gives each partner has a sort of a different, almost a different piece of information, often presented in a table or graphic organizer or something like this. And they have the sentence starter, they have the question stems, and they have to work together asking and answering questions in order to fill in their missing information. And so if I am partner A, I have some information, but I don't have but the blanks that I have are the information that partner B has. And so I have to ask my partner questions in order to fill in my blank information, but partner B knows the answers to those things because that's what's on his or her paper. And so that can be done in the virtual environment as well as in face-to-face with some careful planning, and can really help scaffold interpersonal for the novice learner. A few go-to ideas, whether face-to-face or online. I know many of us are going to be in some kind of virtual environment, at least for part of next year. Breakout rooms will be very helpful for that, to be able to put students in small groups to have discussions and exchanges. Of course, just like in the classroom, they will need scaffolds and supports for doing that. And what they're supposed to be doing in that breakout room. Providing, again, those common questions. We can use, in the virtual environment, we can use discussion boards. Just about any learning management system has a discussion board built into it. That can be used for that writing exchange activities where you find someone who's sort of that people bingo kind of thing. Any tool that gives you those rooms, such as a Google Hangout, a Teams meeting, it might be Zoom, whatever your tool is. We already mentioned info gaps, interviews, any kind of role play, anything that helps them have interaction and scaffolds it for them. Of course, don't forget that conversation partners can be classmates from another class. It doesn't have to be someone in that particular class, especially in the virtual environment. You can work with a colleague and set up other partners. Could be native speakers, could be other language learners that can be their partners. It could be that they exchange digital postcards with another class and have to write back and forth or something like that. There are various tools that can help with the interpersonal mode, although of course there are some challenges to interpersonal in the virtual environment that we might not have in the face-to-face classroom, but there are tools that can help us. So Flipgrid is one. Flipgrid is great for presentational because, as Melissa said, because students can record speech and audio. And so it could be just presentational, or there are ways that students can comment back and forth on their Flipgrids and can interact in that way and make it a little more interpersonal. There are Google tools that can help with interpersonal, such as Google Voice. Linked is a tool that allows students to interact and provide audio responses. There's simulated texting. As Melissa was talking about, those kind of simulated social media tools. Vocaroo allows not just for recording of speech for that presentational speaking, but you can also do some responses in that way. VoiceThread would be another. And so anything that allows students to comment and to interact in some way with audio or with written language can be used to support the interpersonal mode. Although certainly in the virtual environment, there are some that will feel certainly not quite so spontaneous, such as when they're going back and forth commenting on flip grids or something like that. However, we'll work with what we've got, right? So if we have synchronous time and can do those breakout rooms, that would certainly be the ideal. And then for other pieces, we can use these tools to simulate the interpersonal mode and help our students build their skills. And so I think I'm giving it back to Anne-Marie at this point.
Yes, thank you. So you've heard a little bit now about the presentational and interpersonal modes of communication, our first and third standards in our state standards. So just like we've asked after each section, what was the most critical thing for you that you learned from this section? Was it the strategies or the activities, the go-to ideas, the digital resources? What was it do you think you'll be using the most? I'm going to go ahead and open that poll, and you can put your responses in just like before in your control panel. All right, let's finish up with whatever response you're providing so that we can close this out and see what everybody said. All right, let's take a look. And thinking about what would be most critical for you from this section, once again, many of you said those digital tools and resources that were shared would be very helpful. That's good to think about because these are tools are shared from our presenters today about what works best in their districts and their schools and that they've heard back from their teachers. And like I said, we'll continue to post that information and share that across the state. As well as share other ideas. Many of you said, for example, that you like the activities for student output in the interpersonal mode. It's always important to think about activities for student output in a language because that is the kind of thing that takes students a little bit longer, and to make sure you have a variety of activities and different strategies you use to encourage them. About an equal number of you said you really thought the strategies for target language student output in the presentational mode would be helpful, or the go-to ideas that were shared for use in the classroom. A lot of you are commenting in the Q&A box that you can see how these tools can be definitely used online as well as face-to-face. So it's important to remember they're very versatile that way. All right, well, let's move along. And I'm going to go to Mara now. Give me just a moment while I make her the controller of the mouse so that she can go ahead and forward her slides at a good pace.
All right, so we are now at the TEL criteria learning experience number 5. The teacher provides opportunities for students to investigate cultural products, practices, and perspectives in order to then interact appropriately with others with cultural competence. So if we look at that just a little bit more deeply, hopefully, you'll often see this little investigate icon, which comes straight out of the necessful, actful, can-do statements, because when we talk about the intercultural investigations piece, we're That's that investigating the products and practices to understand those cultural perspectives. We are so good at identifying those cultural products and those practices, but we have to really work hard to make sure that we're connecting them to the cultural perspectives or what's really valued in a culture. All right. And then of course, the other icon you'll see is that interaction, where we are preparing students to then interact with others in and from another culture. Sometimes we do some practice interactions with our students in the classrooms, and then that's how we go forward. All right. So if we're going to provide those opportunities for the students to do those intercultural investigations, and that will then prepare them to interact appropriately with others in those target cultures, we want to make sure that the teacher is facilitating activities that allow students to recognize and understand, first of all, how their own culture affects their views of other cultures, and the perspectives that they themselves have and that others would have or might have. So it's up to us as a teacher to help facilitate activities that allow students to interact with those cultural products, those cultural practices, and really understand those cultural perspectives or what's valued in order to contextualize what's happening with the language and to make those tasks more relevant and more rich. And we also want them to then take those language skills and that cultural awareness that they've gained while doing those investigations so that they're interacting more effectively in a cultural context other than the culture that they have that they call their own. And again, we have those icons for investigate and interact. And let's see. All right, so if we had more time, because we don't, I would play this audio clip for you. I actually can, but I don't know if it will bring any sound to you. But the audio clip is from an older, very famous, important sporting event. Some of us are young enough that we would have no idea who they're talking about in this sporting event, and that's okay. But we're going to use those close reading strategies that we saw earlier when Delynda was talking about the interpretive mode. And we're going to, the first time we would listen to this clip, and notice it's audio, not video. So they have to actually listen for certain things. So part of their first interpretive task, which would be their first intercultural investigation, you just want them to figure out with a partner after they listen, what's happening. And you give them the question and the sentence frame here, so that they can say, I think that blank is happening. So in this case, they might say that a game is happening or a football game is happening. Where is this happening? Even our novice students could say, I think this is happening at a stadium or something to that effect. Your more intermediate level students might give you a few more details, but then you stop them, make it a very short conversation. You listen to this audio clip again, and they're going to prepare to talk to a partner to pull actual evidence that they're going to cite directly from this text, in this case being audio. And they're going to listen again, and they're going to listen for words or expressions that tell what is happening to back up the claim that something is happening at a game or a football game. And then they're also going to be listening for what other elements might be in this text, in this case, this audio, that tell you where this is happening. They might hear the cheer of the crowd. They might hear a sports announcer getting really excited, that kind of thing. And then the next time that they would listen to the clip again, this is going to take them definitely a little bit further towards that intermediate level proficiency and get into the values of the perspectives. Why is this audio clip important? Provide details from what you heard to support your opinion. So that's taking those close reading strategies, but we're applying it to something other than printed text. And of course, you want to make sure that your students have these scaffolds that say for each task they could agree or disagree with their partner, and have these sentence starters that say, I agree because, or I disagree because. Now, here's one you could do with an image. This could be an actual piece of famous art. This happens to be a photo of some sort of cultural event happening. And it's the same type of idea, That first intercultural investigation, they would turn to a partner and they're going to have this little mini academic conversation. What is happening based on what you see in the photo? I think that this is, I'll give you a hint. Let's go with it's a wedding. All right. So where is this happening? They might say this is happening at, well, we look around. It could be a restaurant. It could be a hotel. It could be an event center, whatever. It doesn't look like somebody's house necessarily. Who is participating? I think that family and friends are participating. Okay, then you'd come back to the image and you'd have them say, what do you see that tells you what is happening? So they might pull some actual details out to say what is happening. They might have to cite some other evidence from the text, in this case an image, to tell you where this is happening. So like you might see this tray over here that looks like it's a tray that somebody would use to bus tables or bring food out from a kitchen. What other elements of the text or image tell you who is participating? And you can see that there's some younger people and then there's some older people. And you might see that there's some other more traditional dress versus modern dress, that type of thing. And then as we're trying to get to those perspectives again, you want them to say, what is valued in this particular image? So in this case, it looks like maybe they're honoring somebody who's older. So maybe they value family and they value the older members of their family. They might value tradition, as you can see that they're dressed in more traditional clothing compared to the rest, and so on and so forth. Okay, so all of these are just sample tasks of intercultural investigations, but we're preparing them for those intercultural interactions. So now if we go back to that sports clip, yes, it was about football, I'll tell you that much. So after they've done all of those close readings and they've done all those things to do that investigation about sports, now it's time for them to take that knowledge and do an intercultural interaction. In this case, of course, it'll be simulated with a classmate, or maybe they have an exchange going on, a virtual exchange, and they might talk to somebody from a target culture school through a virtual pen pal type thing. But with a partner, exchange information about your favorite sport and explain why it's your favorite. So they have to make a claim, but they have to negotiate meaning between each other. That's what makes that interpersonal. And then for a more intermediate level, they might compare important sporting events happening in a target country and decide which one you both want to attend or watch. And so that's going to take a lot of negotiation back and forth. That's that intercultural interaction, of course. And then if we go back to this particular text, which happened to be the image of this wedding, it would be an unscripted role play. That's the whole point. If it's interpersonal, it's not scripted, it's unrehearsed. So you might put them in groups of 4 or in groups, and each of you enters the event and becomes one of the people in the image. So somebody might choose to be this person, somebody might choose to be this person. You can even give the students the flexibility of being themselves and entering the event from somewhere out of the scene and entering. But again, they would take what they've learned through their intercultural investigations so that they could then appropriately interact with others from another culture or within that culture. All right, so we're going to shift gears slightly, and this performance, or this TEL criteria here, is about performance and feedback. The teacher measures student language growth through performance assessments. That doesn't say grammar, that doesn't say vocabulary recall, that says student language growth through performance assessments. Well, if we know that our 4 standards in North Carolina have to do with the 3 modes of communication, as well as culture, then that's probably what we're going to focus on. We're going to make sure that our students' learning experiences prepare them for the performance tasks. Everything that we've shown you is a performance task. You're then helping to prepare them, kind of like little mini rehearsals all along, so that when they have a more summative performance task, they've already had those experiences. Think of it, for example, if you're teaching somebody how to drive, they'll have learned how to turn the engine on and off. They'll have learned how to check all their mirrors. They'll have done all those little steps before you actually take them out on the road and give them the full driving test. So you want to ensure that those learning experiences prepare them for the performance tasks, that you're using performance tasks that clearly outline expectations and have a real world purposeful context, not just because, oh, in the book it said we should do this. No, we want them to actually talk with people from another culture. That's the whole point of using the language. We want to make sure that the teacher is using performance tasks that allow students to demonstrate growth relative to the proficiency targets. For example, our parents at the novice level, you want to make sure that you're preparing them for something just maybe one sub-level above where they're landing. You've given them that scaffolding and so on. You don't want to give them a task that's more appropriate for, say, intermediate high. They're not going to be successful. By the same token, if your students are supposed to be hitting a target of, say, intermediate mid, you don't want them to just produce a one-sentence answer. You remember that our performance levels are defined by the tasks and the text type, so you want to make sure that those performance assessments are aligned with those expectations.
And as you're getting ready to go on, we do have a couple questions in the question box about some of the tasks you've just talked about with culture, and how they can still be done in the target language, even with our novice low and novice mid learners.
Oh, that's
what would you
a
recommend?
Question. I would recommend, number one, there's a great graphic organizer from the creative language class where it uses icons, and the students might circle things that they recognize, that they hear. Like they might recognize that something that looks like a dollar sign or a peso sign or a euro sign is representing money. Might do something that looks like a nice little icon that definitely represents family. Something that looks like a heart that represents love. I mean, you get the idea. You may want to make sure that you're targeting and asking for things that they do know or that is related to your context. You wouldn't just randomly pick out the wedding one if they haven't talked about family members yet. And you can always provide, again, that virtual word wall or however you want to provide certain vocabulary with the target language and a word if they need to know the word for wedding or they need to know the word for love or whatever it might be. If it had to do with sports, and you might have them say things like, you would want to make sure that you're using that in an appropriate context where they've actually learned a little bit about sports to be able to have that conversation. You would always want to do the tasks in the target language because our standards are based on their proficiency expectations in the target language. We don't have anything where we're asking them to do the task in English. So you would want to figure out what your scaffolds are, and you want to make sure that you're picking something that is appropriately aligned to material that is in a familiar context for them and give them the scaffolds and vocabulary supports they need when appropriate. All right, so where am I? D and E, yes. So the student uses performance tasks that provide feedback on how well students have met the performance objective. You might want to use things like rubrics to help give them some targeted feedback rather than just, hey, good job, or goodness gracious, by teachers who used to have the red pens and would take off quarter points for missing letters and accents. Need to be careful about that type of thing. You should also make sure that as a teacher, you're identifying student successes and opportunities for modification to improve future performance. So what's going well and what can we do to stretch you to the next level with your language performance, not necessarily perfection in grammar mastery or vocabulary spelling in a performance task. So here are a couple sample presentational prompts. So you see this lovely image of this crazy house. So you just dozed off at home and you've been really sick and the medicine is making you hallucinate. You dream that a weird painter came in and changed all the colors in your house. So you might have the students tell you what rooms changed, what happened to them. They could do this orally, they could do this, they could sign this, whatever it might be. They could draw pictures. If they're really at the very novice baby parrot level, they might have to draw pictures and use an arrow of it looked like this and now it looks like that. that type of thing. And here's another sample. So FIFA is looking for some student volunteers at the next World Cup in Qatar or Qatar 2022. Obviously, you want to help. A free trip to see live international soccer. So FIFA needs to learn more about you so that this trip is as fun as possible. And then you would ask them to make a video. You could do this in Canvas if that's your learning management system. They could record it on their phone and upload it to Google Drive. They could do this in Flipgrid or all of the other tools that we've seen earlier. But you get the idea. There needs to be something they can relate to for them to hook into to be motivated to do it. And they should have had opportunities to do very similar things before they get to these final tasks where they're going to have a heavier summative assessment grade. Okay, Anne-Marie, it's all you.
Great, thank you. All right, so as usual, we have a polling question to ask. What was most useful for you from the Culture and Performance Assessment High Five that you just heard about? Is it learning about, investigate, and interact with intercultural competence? Is it remembering that culture tests are done in the target language? Is it that having tasks and prompts to use and or adapt for your classes is going to be helpful for you? Or is it that you have some resources for further exploration? So I'll go ahead and run that question. And once again, you can put your answers in on your control panel. All right, we're almost done with this question. Be sure and get your response in so that we can see what everybody thought would be most useful from this section. Let's take a look. Over half of you said that having tasks and prompts to use or adapt for your classes would be very useful. And again, like I said, we'll post these slides and other links to resources and materials for you to use. So those will always be available to you, and you can take those and use them and expand on them. Over 50 of you said you want those resources for further exploration. We're going to show you where you can find some of those even more on our website here in a moment. Several of you said you liked learning about investigate and interact with intercultural competence and how we're thinking about that in the classroom. Many times you'll hear teachers now say they're going to lead with culture when they think about communication and having students demonstrate what they know and are able to do with the language. We also have several of you who said it was good to remember that culture tasks are done in the target language. We even have a question about that in the Q&A box. Someone said, do you also recommend that the teacher pose questions in target language too? And the answer is yes, because the expectation is that teachers and students use the target language in the classroom 90% or more of the time. So everyone should be using that target language. All right. Let's move on and finish up for today. Melissa? Give me just a second, we're unmuting. But keep in mind that this section we're about to talk about was something that was added very recently. Based on the feedback we were getting from the field, people said they wanted some tips for effective remote learning and how that works, just some overall ideas. And so we have something for you that we didn't actually have in the first broadcast that we did with this information, but we hope you'll enjoy it. All right.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So in my experience working with teachers through spring semester, we were able to do, through trial and error, I was able to put together some things and some rules that have been kind of helpful for them in doing learning, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous learning. And in particular, when it's synchronous learning, we had some particular challenges present themselves. And so following these simple tips, we have found very helpful. Establish rules and procedures and routines just like you would in a normal classroom. We still need that structure, have clear goals, and organize content with engaging materials, making chunking, bite-sized chunks and activities so that it's not too overwhelming for students. And make sure that when you're planning your lessons, that you include all parts of the lesson. What do I mean by all parts of the lesson? You know, we have to have some sort of direct instruction or teaching, right? We have to have a presentation of materials in a lesson. And then we typically follow what we call a gradual release, where I do it as a model, and then we do it together, and then we break off into pairs or groups, and a few do it, and then before they do it by themselves. And when we do the modeling and the we do it together and the few do it, that's where students are making meaning. They are making meaning of that new material that they have just learned before they can actually go apply it. So we need to make sure, and sometimes it can present itself a little bit more challenging in an online platform to present the opportunity for the making meaning, but that's the most crucial part of the lesson, and we want to make sure that's not left out. Be present, meaning, you know, if it's synchronous, have your cameras on, have a clear agenda, make sure you communicate clearly with announcements and reminders, because in the classroom, it's like we have to remind them 20 times a period that, you know, Friday they're going to have a test or a quiz or whatever. We have to do that remote as well. Making sure that we're still giving timely feedback to our students on their work and in grading. Have a regular, reliable schedule. And in addition to the schedule, if they know they're going to have X amount of assignments or X days a week at this time is when we're going to have our synchronous learning, make sure you offer some additional office hours too, so you can provide extra supports and helps for students. In planning for your synchronous and asynchronous learning, make sure it's a time that is well structured and you still provide scaffolds and supports to meet your learners' needs. Make sure you're still providing collaborative opportunities. A lot of online platforms now have the opportunity for breakout rooms. So that's something that's cool for synchronous learning. And of course, in Google Docs and things like that, they can collaborate within a document, even if it's asynchronous. Make sure that whatever tools that you're going to use to providing your remote learning, it's recommended that you choose a handful of tools that are easy for you as the teacher, but also easy for students to stick with those. Because in addition to you preparing all your lessons online and students trying to get used to whatever platform and doing the remote learning, to add a whole other piece of learning in there with like a new tech tool every week, that just kind of muddies the water. And we're not, yes, we want them to learn technology and tech tools, but our main goal is to focus on whatever material it is we're trying to teach them. So pick a few and stick with them. Make sure you support their independent learning, motivate them, celebrate their victories, recognize the emotional impact that all remote learning has on them in terms of their social emotional well-being and whatever other challenges their families may be experiencing through this time, as well as also building time for reflection opportunities. We know that as teachers, we should be reflectioners on what we do every day, but also create some time for them to be reflective and support metacognitive learning so that they're responsible and take responsibility for their own learning. But above all, be realistic. It is not going to be the same amount of hours. It is not going to be the same amount of time. And we have to make our instruction and our instruction accordingly to that. So hopefully some of these tips will be able to help you moving forward into the 2021 school year. And I definitely wish all of you a wonderful start to your school year. And with that, I will turn it back over to Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much. We've shared a lot of information today. We have some additional things here, resources for further exploration. A lot of the things you've seen us share today come from places like the resources that Leslie Grand, who's a retired world language coordinator from Maryland, has put together. In fact, she put together a whole website under the idea of professional generosity, and that information is linked on our World Languages website for the state. We wanted to show you kind of where some of that was coming from in case you wanted to explore it yourself. You also heard us talk about the creative language class and some adaptable activities and things, and we have a whole list of more ideas for target language use at that bit.ly link you see there. I know many of you were asking about that in the chat room, and you said, you know, I really need ideas for how to support target language use, especially in remote learning or online learning. And so there's all kinds of ideas there in addition to what you've heard today. We also do want to encourage you to go to that Teaching World Languages Remotely resource bank that we have growing. We have the main landing page that's accessible with the bit.ly link, bit.ly/teachwlremote. And it has 3 subpages where you'll see some of these materials we've been sharing today linked up so you can get to them easily. We have one on specifically technology resources for teaching world languages online. So those digital tools we talked about will be posted there if they're not already. We have a page on multilingual resources, so resources and ideas and tasks that can be used in any language that's being taught. And then we have that language-specific resources section like we showed you that has things for the languages that we teach here in North Carolina. Finally, as we're closing out today, we want to remind you of upcoming professional development for world language educators. We will have our NCDPI World Language Webinar Series. It is the PD or Professional Development tab on our websites. And keep in mind, we have a website just for world languages. We have one that has it for world languages like dual inherited languages or dual language immersion, DLI. And we have a new Linguafolio website. And so you see here some of the webinars we've already done that are part of this year's series, but there's more to come. And so keep looking at those web pages for that information. And also make sure you sign up for our NCDPI updates, our listserv announcements and things like that you probably heard about this webinar from. We do also keep a running list of K-20 PD offerings from all kinds of organizations like ACTFL or FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, or language-specific groups. So check that list in case there's something that would be of interest to you and support you in your needs in specific communication modes, let's say, or with teachers who teach the same language you do. And finally, I want to end our broadcast today by sharing with you where everything will be posted. I will post this recording, our slides, our handouts, and everything on the World Languages website that you see listed there under our World Language, our webinar series information page. So that's under that professional development tab. You can always connect with me via email or phone, or you may want to like the NCDPI World Languages Facebook page. I thank everyone for joining us today, most specifically our co-presenters who worked to build these materials for you and share them. We really appreciate everyone being here today and sharing their ideas and what works as we move into this new school year.